Figure skating is theater, and that's what makes it different than any other sport.
I think few people realize that skating takes a long apprenticeship.
Each generation that comes along pushes the generation before them.
It was in my day, and most of the days, or a good portion of the days since my day, that was a different world than what it is today. When I was 13 or 12, I was competing in the Middle Atlantic States Juvenile Championship or something like that. My parents made me go to the headmaster, who was the perfect example of a headmaster. His name was Marshall Umpleby. He said, you want a week off to do what? And nobody knew about figure skating in those days. They knew from Sonja Henie movies in the 30s, but they did not know about competition. He did not say, you can't do it. You can't take a week off. He walked out to his secretary and said, give me Mr. Button's marks. Now, there were 6 courses that we were taking. 60 was passing. I had 5 60s and a 61. He came back to me and he said, you want a week off? I want 70s. So I got him the 70s, of course. The next year I needed 2 weeks off because it was now the National Junior Championship. He said, you want to take 2 weeks off? I want 80s. So finally in my senior year, I said, look, Mr. Umpleby, I've been invited to go to Stockholm for the 1947 World Championship. He said, Dick, take all the time that you needed.
Hayes and I never felt that competitiveness between us. He was always good to me. He looked after me. He made sure my skates were sharpened. He made sure that my boots were polished.
And in those days, David's lament was, nobody asked me if I wanted to skate. I had to skate because you skated. He had the gift for free skating, and there was just no question about it. And I was always looking over my shoulder at him. But it was good to train with him on the rink all the time because him nipping at my heels sort of kept me moving.
The Olympics in 1948, they were 3 or 4 years after the Second World War, and you went to St. Moritz and stayed in hotels. I lived in the Palace Hotel, which was the most luxe hotel of all time. Everybody dressed for dinner in black tie, and it was wonderful. I was flying. Look, when you win the Olympics when you're 18, you fly. And it was so exciting to be recognized. It's an invigorating experience.
Dick was an idol of mine when I was a young skater. And what I admired, and of course, to me, skating was jumps for so many years, that I loved to jump. That's what skating was all about. And Dick was the great first jumper of all time. So I very much idolized Dick Button.
I was a beneficiary of Dick's revolutionizing the sport because the sport in this country, in the United States, was influenced by Dick's approach to the sport, which was much more athletic. And frankly, that appealed to me. When Dick retired after the '52 Olympics, and I was third in the Worlds that year, so I thought, all right, I'm within pretty good range now. And that's why I skated that additional year and came out to the Broadmoor to do my training with Eddie Sholden. The Olympics in 1952 was outdoors, no television,
You absolutely had to understand what happened if it rained. What did you do if there was wind? Where did you place your figure? And where did you place your difficult jumps?
Whereas 56, the arena, while it was open, it was an open artificial ice arena and had much more control as to the elements, or at least the quality of the ice. In 56, the pressure was a totally different world. The pressure that you put on yourself, it's what you perceive others expecting of you, what you expect of yourself, what you've trained for, the people who have committed themselves to help you get there. All of that plays on you.
There is nothing in one's competitive experience that truly prepares one for an Olympics. The pressures of an Olympics is always a shock.
It was one of those competitions where when it was done, people say, oh, you must have been thrilled. At the moment of winning and found out I'd won, it just was a sea of relief. The thrill and satisfaction set in deeply when I was able to reflect on it. But every skater has to figure out, every athlete in any sport has to figure out how to deal with those pressures.
Hayes Jenkins had wonderful, long, deep edges. He did the best flying sit spin I have ever seen in my life. I did a flying sit spin, but it wasn't as good as Hayes.
I wanted nothing more than for him to win the 56 Olympics, and to stand below him on the podium was probably my greatest thrill in skating. To look up as the national anthem played and to see my brother on the top step.
When I got back, Colorado College decided to declare a day of vacation. I really made me feel like a hero. And that was not something that I ever anticipated. It caught me quite by surprise. By the time of the Olympics in 1956, when we were competing against each other, David was already doing triples. He was really quite ahead of his time in terms of his ability to do that consistently.
He had the softest knees. He would go down and up in a jump, and he just had knees that were soft.
It certainly was a factor in my graciously deciding to retire. But it also made me realize that each generation that comes along pushes the generation before them. And there's a time to be gracious about it and get out of the way.
I was in medical school in the second year.
I said, you cannot conceivably defend your world title to stay in a position to then go into the defending champion to the Olympics. I said, that's 2 years. And he said, nobody asked me if I wanted to skate. I had to skate because you skated. He said, now I can't quit.
I'm a very stubborn person, and I would not make concessions. So I stayed in medical school. My coach was 1,200 miles away. Fortunately, my brother would come up to Cleveland and work with me.
How he did both, I don't know. I could not have gone to law school, and I counseled him not to try. But fortunately, I was living within an hour, so I could get up to the rink a couple days a week and work with him, because Eddie Sholden was, of course, back here in Colorado Springs. And so David was basically trying to train by himself, and that's very hard.
So I took 3 weeks off from medical school, which scared the living life out of me to take that time. Then you try to prepare yourself mentally for the challenge of it. Once a warm-up starts, once one music starts, those things flow into a pattern that you've trained yourself for. It is the waiting and the seeing competitors come off and on. That's when the pressure builds. So I got myself up at 5 o'clock in the morning in Squaw Valley. Nobody was up. It was pitch dark and the snow would crunch under my feet. And for me, it was a very magic moment to walk around the Olympic venues, and it relaxed me in a very great way. Every Olympic athlete can think back to sort of unusual moments that are very precious in his memories. And for me, that was very precious in mine. Television changed everything. And nobody had the understanding and expectation of what it would do to bring the Olympics into people's living rooms. Because when I returned from the Olympics, I thought I would return in relative anonymity. And instead, my entire medical school class, people carried me on their shoulders through the airport. It was a scene that I was totally unprepared for. I think few people realize that skating takes a long apprenticeship. When people get to the top, they'll stay there as long as they can, and there's very little room at the top. There's very little room to find yourself going to an Olympics.
Looking back on the Olympic experience, certainly the most intense competitive experience of our lives, we hope the skaters that have the opportunity to compete in the Olympics remember that you do have to enjoy the moment.
16 years I competed, and it all came down to 5 minutes at the very end. And that's a magic moment, and it's one point in your life you brought something to a complete, total, and logical conclusion with success. The gold medal is a very precious thing.
Figure skating is theater, and that's what makes it different than any other sport.
When you see the very finest of skating, it has transcended sport and becomes a piece of art. And that's what I think we all love most about skating, is it really becomes an art form at its best.
Fantastic, thank you.